Good afternoon, folks. This is Robert Chappell, the executive editor here at Madison365 with your daily update for today, which is Wednesday, April 7th. Just massively historic local election yesterday, and we're going to talk more about that after the break. But first, I have to tell you that the update today is supported by Forward Theater Company presenting Lewiston Clarkston by Samuel Hunter, a two-play experience that follows descendants of the famous explorers who struggled to forge their own legacies in the modern American landscape. This virtual theater experience streaming online wherever you are. You don't have to come to Madison to see good professional theater here at Forward Theater Company. Streaming online April 9th, that's Friday, through the 25th. Tickets available now at forwardtheater.com. One other thing I want to kind of plug today, not so much a sponsor, but a thing we're doing next week. Next week at this time, Wednesday and Thursday next week, 14th and 15th, is the first ever Men's Leadership Summit that we are putting together as a sort of a spin-off of our Wisconsin Leadership Summit, which we do every October. That's our big event that we do for people of color across the state. Coming out of the 2020 Wisconsin Leadership Summit, we heard a lot of demand and desire for a men's summit and a women's summit. So we're doing the men's one next week and then the women's one in June. And this panel is something I've been really excited about. This is a political leadership panel. It's a panel of elected officials, some of whom you might recognize, some of whom you might not. I'm just talking about that whole process, being in that process, about being in that space. The moderator on the left there is DJ Hines. He's a faith leader in Milwaukee. He's the chief operating officer of one of the biggest black churches over there in Milwaukee, and he's just going to serve as the moderator, and he's going to be great. But the panelists that you can see here are Marlon White Eagle, who's the president of the Ho-Chunk Nation, Calvin Barrett, who's actually not been elected yet. He has been appointed sheriff of Dane County and will, in all likelihood, run for election for a full term when his term expires in 2 years. But he's going to be serving in an elected role, basically. This guy, Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, will be part of it. And then Yi Leng Zhang, who one of the busiest guys in politics. He's on the DC Everest School Board. He's on the Marathon County Board. And he is on the Village of Weston Village Board. Literally every elected board he can be on right now, he's on. He's also executive director of the Hmong American Center in Wausau. So this panel takes place first thing in the morning, Thursday next week. Registration is free. Okay, we got enough sponsorship, enough support from the business community to help us make this a free event, which is exciting. So I'll put a link in the comments, but it's a very simple registration form, and again it's free, but we are requiring registration just so we can kind of keep it a closed. Everybody's welcome to come, but we want it to be not just on Facebook Live, want it to be an actual event where it is a virtual event, but registration is required, and you can do that now, and it's free. Okay, so on to the coronavirus news now. The numbers today look very similar to yesterday, which is not good. Right? We have, one piece of tiny good news is that we had more tests and fewer cases, but not by a lot. Okay, not much better. 727 new cases still, which is more than we've been seeing in the past couple of months, really. But that's on 5,100 tests. So slightly higher testing, slightly lower new cases, kind of a wash. Now, the positive test rate for the past 7 days is still 3.5, We really want that to be below 3, right? That's where we've been trying to get to. 3.0 is what public health people will tell you got to be under. 3% of all tests being positive means you have it more or less under control. You know where the infection is spreading. You're doing enough testing. You're getting enough negative tests, right, to keep that number nice and low. That means you're testing a lot of people. It means 97% of the people you're testing are testing negative. That's good. That's what we want to see. Once you get above 3, you're starting to lose control of it a little bit. So to be at 3.5 now, not great. We've been above 3 now for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days. Not great. Active cases are also up. Now we're at 7,715 active cases out of 581,712 that we've had in the past, year plus. 1.33% of all those cases we've ever had are currently active. That's relatively lowish. That was 22% at one point, right? That was like 70-something thousand. But again, you never want to just look at a number on its own. You want to look at the number in the trend, right? And the trend is upward. That's what we don't like. We'd like to see that active case number down toward until it gets to 0, right? So I don't like that that's increasing. We report 5 fatalities today. Our 7-day average of deaths is now down to 4, which is, good. But remember, the deaths are a lagging indicator, right? So this sort of surge in new cases we've seen just in these past 5 days or so, we're not going to see that impact hospitalizations and deaths for another 3 or 4 weeks. So I would not be surprised if our death average goes up. It's not going to go catastrophically up. It's not going to get to 60 like it was in November and December, right? It might get up to 8 or 9 if we're not careful, like a month from now. I mean, if you think about it, we are just barely more than 1% of all the identified cases have led to a fatality. So you got 700 cases today. 7 of those people are probably not going to make it. Yesterday we had 886 cases. 8 or 9 of those people are not going to make it. Now, it's also true that we might see a slight decrease in the death rate just because a lot of older people have been vaccinated, and a lot of these new cases we're seeing, the average age is skewing a little bit younger. So we're getting more cases in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and fewer cases in the 70s and 80s. So the population who's currently getting these new cases are slightly less vulnerable to hospitalization and death, so it might drop a little bit. But still, it's going to be a lagging indicator. We're not going to see the sort of the fatal effects of these new cases for another month. So, it's good that our death rate is low right now, and I hope it stays that way, but I wouldn't be surprised if it ticks up at least a little bit about 3 weeks, 4 weeks from now. Vaccinations. We're going to talk more about vaccinations after the break because we're going to have Shiva Bidar-Sielaff join us to talk about UW Health and their efforts to get more vaccines to more people. But I'll give you a quick rundown. We are reporting today 75,000 more shots given in the past 24 hours. Again, those are reported. It's not clear that we gave that 75,000 shots were actually given in the past 24 hours. They were reported. We are now at 1.2, almost 1.3 million people having completed their vaccinations. That's about 21.1% of the population. We're closing in on 2 million people who've gotten at least one shot, which is great. We've given a total of just shy of 3.2 million shots, given to a total of almost 2 million people. So that's all great. The question, I see a question here from Kate. Any insight as to why things are headed in the wrong direction despite more vaccinations? The thing is that my rudimentary and amateur understanding of the vaccination is that the vaccines are not going to have an appreciable impact on the actual sort of the epidemiology of the spread until you get closer to herd immunity, which is, 70 to 80% vaccinated. I wouldn't be surprised if once we get toward 50% that we start to see these numbers come back down a little bit. But if you think about it, we've got, you got 2 million. What did I say? 1.3 million people almost vaccinated. That leaves you 3.5 million people in Wisconsin who are not vaccinated. Of those 3.5 million, 2.5 to 3 million have also not tested positive yet. So, that's a lot of people who are vulnerable. We also know that the vaccines are pretty concentrated in the cities right now. I mean, they're really putting pressure on the state, but most of the vaccines that are happening in Milwaukee, Madison, a lot of rural communities are getting vaccines, but not quite at that speed. So, I think people, just generally speaking, feeling like we got below 3% on that positive test rate. Everything seemed fine. And you get signals from the government that you're starting to, push to open schools, that kind of stuff. People just kind of let their guard down. I think broadly, statewide, what I'm seeing, and my sense is that what's happening here is basically the same thing that happened in June of last year, where we get things nice and low. Everybody's sick of being locked down. The weather's nice. We get outside. We go to events. We do things. We have weddings. We have birthday parties, and we breathe on each other, and we spread this virus. I think that's what's happening again, and I'm concerned because we have about at least 3 months, maybe 4 months before we get to that herd immunity level of vaccination, right? And if we talk about June of last year when things were good and then started to go bad toward the end of June and started to go up in early July, August, September, 3 months. By the end of September, things were full crisis mode here. So I worry that if we, the next 3 months, April, May, June, and going into July, we could be kind of approaching that again toward July. I'm a little optimistic because it's summer and people are more outdoors than indoors, right? I mean, as it gets to summer, we're still indoors at schools and stuff like that, so that's not great. But the universities are doing a much better job of containing it right now. So I don't think it's going to go quite to that catastrophe level that we did in the fall. But I'm significantly worried that the vaccines are not going to quite keep up. I think this is a lot of it. We've abandoned our masks. I mean, around Dane County, everybody's still masking up for the most part, but elsewhere in the state they're not. But that's also one of the reasons that Dane County is at 1.0 positive test rate, and the rest of the state's at 3.5. It works. It really does. So I appreciate the question and the comments. Thank you, Kathy. It is that's all I have for coronavirus. There's lots more news to talk about because we have Shiva joining us to talk about vaccinations in underserved communities. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the massive, historic, cannot be overstated, historic nature of the elections yesterday. But we'll be back. So don't stroll away. I do want to talk about that and take your questions on it because it is important. But we'll be back right after this.
Here in the Midwest, community is important.
Having a healthcare system that's looking out for us,
that's actively addressing the racial disparities in healthcare is important.
When we can get good quality care, we can do more. We can achieve more.
We can be the kind of community we want to be, and that's really important.
UW Health. Remarkable medicine. Remarkable care.
All right, we're going to talk elections for a minute. I don't know why my camera keeps drifting like this and getting that weird sound stuff. So yesterday was election day, a local election day, and in across the state, Jill Underley, pretty handily, in fact, won the election for state superintendent of public instruction. There were a handful of mayoral races that didn't, that were not surprising. So we won't dig into those too much. But in Madison, for those of you who are in Madison or who care about or who live like near Madison, where Madison is, I don't live in Madison. I can't vote for Madison Common Council, but what happens in Madison affects my life because I live near Madison. So I am an interested observer of Madison Common Council. And for the first time ever in history, and this did not dawn on me until almost 10 o'clock last night, just watching the results come in. For the first time in history, the Madison Common Council is made up of mostly people of color. White people are the minority on the Common Council in Madison. Yesterday morning, of the 20 seats on the council, 6 were held by people of color, and 14 were white. By the time everything shook out last night, and by the time they all get sworn in on Thursday, that number will have doubled. There are 12 people of color on the Common Council. I'll talk through a couple of these races for those of you who are from Madison and care about this stuff. The District 14 Common Council President Sherry Carter got a spirited challenge and a very vigorous campaign from Brandy Grayson, who's a local community activist, but was able to fend off that challenge pretty handily. Got about 2/3 of the vote when all was said and done. So Sherry Carter keeps her seat. In District 8, which is the campus district, one of the co-founders of the UW-Madison BIPOC Coalition, Juliana Bennett, she's a junior at UW. She will represent that campus district in District 8. In District 10, on near West Side, Zachary Henack did not run for re-election, so Yannette Figueroa Cole won that, and she's lived there in that district for 25 years, but she's born in Puerto Rico. And then over on the east side, of the far east side, J.L. Curry, who just dominated in the primary, dominated again in the general. She is the housing director at YWCA as a Black woman. So those are all the races that were not big upsets. Were not shocking. One race that was also not shocking but surprising, over on the far west side, if you know Madison, you know Paul Skidmore. He's been on. He was running for his 11th term. He's been on the Common Council since 2005. He's known as a more conservative member. He's pretty much been opposed to any police reform efforts. He's been one of only a couple of alders who have really pushed back against any sort of oversight of the police, any sort of reform, anything like that. And Nikki Conklin, is a community organizer type person who lives over there, beat him. The thing is, in these lower turnout elections, a couple hundred votes can be a 10-point margin. So the percentage margin looks bigger than it is kind of, but she got 55% of the vote. And then what that really surprised me, maybe it shouldn't have, but on the north side, progressive Rebecca Kemble lost her bid for re-election to Charles Mayadzi, who is a union guy, a union labor guy. He's Black, and he's less likely to be like a defund the police kind of person. He's like, what he has said, I don't mean to speak for him, but what he has said in his campaign is that he wants police reform, but also police to have adequate resources to keep the community safe, that kind of thing, which is, there are factions on the city council and just factions in Madison that would rather see, massive radical reforms of the police and not that kind of reform. But the north side is, slightly more conservative than the rest of the city, especially the communities of color there, north side. So it's not. So I was surprised. The power of incumbency is so strong. There was several other candidates of color, several other sort of more progressive candidates who couldn't crack 30% of the vote just because incumbency is such a powerful thing. So for him to beat an incumbent up there, there was some outside money, which a lot of people didn't like. There were some billboards. Several of these races had billboards paid for by this shadowy outside group that wasn't quite the fault of the candidates, but it's like outside money is outside money, and nobody really likes that. So that's, don't love that. But when all is said and done, however, what you have are Barbara Harrington McKinney in the 1st District, Brian Benford, who is returning to the council after he was on the council a long time ago. Now he's back on. Nasser Wahili in the 7th District, Juliana Bennett, which I mentioned in the 8th, Nikki Conklin in the 9th, Yanette Figueroa Cole in the 10th, and Arvina Martin in the 11th District, who is a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, Syed Abbas, who's in the 12th District on the east side, Sherry Carter, the president, on the 14th District on the south side, J.L. Curry on the east side, and then Charles Mayazi now on the north side, and then Christian Alburas in District 20 on the southwest side. That's 12 people who are not white. Now, add that. That's one, and I again, it's not going to immediately transform anything, and it's going to teach some white progressives something that maybe they don't realize yet, and that is that people of color are not a monolith, right? You're not gonna get them to vote your progressive way just because they're not white, right? So we will see how that shakes out, and I'm going to give you an example of how it will shake out in a minute. But add the now majority minority city council, the fact that we have the same situation on the school board, we have 4 people of color, 3 white people on the school board. You have a black police chief. You have a black sheriff. You have a black superintendent of schools. You have a black superintendent of schools next door in Verona. You have a black superintendent of schools just a little bit to the north in Baraboo. The power structures, just over the past, 2 years, 3 years, has shifted seismically toward people of color. And we are 8 years removed from race equity, the report from 2008-13 that laid out all the disparities that exist in Dane County. All of those disparities still exist. But to start to chip away at those disparities, you have to put people of color in positions of authority. We white people have to hand off some of our power. We can't do it for them. We can't, there's a lot of talk. We used to say a lot that black people need to see us at table. But it's always been very clear that it's our table, our being white people's table, that we are inviting them to. They come to the table, they tell us what they need, and then they leave the table so that we can do that for them. That's not how it's going to work anymore, guys. And that's a good thing, in my estimation. We got to step away from the table. And that's what's happened. There were 2 white men who actually decided not to run in this election for the specific purpose of ceding their authority to people of color. Max Prestigiacomo in the 8th District was the alder and decided it was going to run again and decided not to because he knew that there were black women behind him who would run instead, and he thought that was the better course. And that's Juliana Bennett now is going to take that seat. And then I'm sorry, I don't remember the guy's name, but Brian Benford had an opponent in the 6th District who was white and ultimately decided, we need more people, we need more voices of color at the table on the council. I'm going to step away from the table. And that's the kind of thing that has to happen. And why does it matter? it's not that they're gonna solve all the problems immediately. It's not that they're gonna take away power from white people. I mean, still almost half the council is white, and all the wealth is white. Right? That's what we'll get to in a minute. And I'm sorry, this is more commentary than you probably wanted today, but you look at the school board, and there's a recent decision it's not a big deal. It doesn't fundamentally change anything in the school board or in the school district. But there's a policy in the handbook that when layoffs are required, or when surplusing is required, when a teacher has to get reassigned, or teachers have to get laid off for whatever reason if enrollment declines, it's always been based solely on seniority. Whoever is the most recent hire is the first to get laid off. And that is ostensibly a colorblind policy, but it ends up having a racist impact because it basically favors the status quo, and the status quo is mostly white teachers. So your black and brown teachers are going to tend to be newer, are going to be more likely to be at that bottom end of the seniority, and they're going to be the first to get laid off, which just reinforces that no matter how hard you try to recruit people of color to be teachers, it's hard to retain them when they're the first ones getting laid off, right? So the school board changed that policy to factor in like cultural awareness, student performance, foreign language proficiency, advanced degrees, as well as seniority. And that was a racial lines vote. That policy would not have changed except that the school board is mostly people of color who understood it from that lens. The 3 white people voted against it. The 4 people of color voted for it because they were more able to see this is a racial equity issue because color blindness is racist, and more willing to vote on that basis. Now, again, that's one policy provision in one handbook that's about this thick. Right? It doesn't fundamentally alter the school board or anything like that, the school district or anything like that. But those are the kinds of things when you approach even the tinier policies from that racial equity lens, from the experience of one who has felt systemic racism instead of one who's benefited from it. That's how change is going to happen. Right? No matter how woke I am, I have benefited my entire life from white supremacy. I have benefited from systemic racism. I have benefited from white privilege. And I can't deny that, and I can't shake that off. You know what I mean? I can try to do my best to acknowledge it, to understand it, to make decisions based on that, but I'm never going to live without it. So when people are actually in, not only at the table, that's the thing. They're not just at the table anymore. They have power now. And they're going to bring power from the perspective of somebody who has been oppressed by systemic racism, not somebody who's benefited from it. Right? And that's going to change things. And I think there are probably some white people, some white progressives especially, who are a little nervous about that. And that's all right. You know, that's how it's going to happen. Now, all those disparities are still there. Black people are still more likely to be incarcerated, still more likely to get a longer sentence for the same offense. White students are still far more likely to be able to read at grade level than black students. It's going to take a while for this to disseminate, into those day-to-day on-the-ground realities, right? But it's a step in the right direction. And now we have to ensure that we don't lose this now, you know what I mean? Like, this is, I was talking to our CEO, Henry, and this is now, Madison's kind of a national model now for this. A city that's majority white, and we're not Atlanta or Milwaukee, where it's not shocking for either of those cities to have a lot of people of color on their common councils and things like that. They just have a much higher population. But for a mostly white city to basically, for the white power structure to cede some of its power to people of color, it's pretty, I don't know, it's pretty impressive. And now we have to make sure that it's not just a one-time thing. It's not just a token. It's not just okay, we're going to try this, but don't get comfortable because white people are going to take our power back, right? Because that's kind of our instinct a lot of times. So we'll have to just keep an eye on that and see what happens in another year or two. And it's been interesting to see this because, you know, I also mentioned that the media in this town is still overwhelmingly white, right? Literally half of the black and brown press corps works for me and works for Madison365. We have a very small team, and they're all, you know, mostly black and brown. And the rest of the outlets in this town have very, very few people of color working for them. So there's still issues there. But it's been interesting to be here for these 5 years and bear witness and report on and, frankly, push this change. So it was I can't. It's funny how I'm the only one talking about this. None of the other media outlets in town are even talking about this because they're so committed to colorblindness. Every other media outlet in this town is committed to not talking about race, to being colorblind, to being like, well, to the best candidates won. It doesn't matter if they're black. Well, it does. Okay, it does. But I don't think you can. I think you circle that day. Circle yesterday on your calendar. So that's the day when things really took a significant change. All right, that is enough commentary. I'm going to now step away and let you hear from Shiva Bidar-Sielaff, who is Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at UW Health, who are doing a lot of work very intentionally to get past some of these disparities, right, in vaccines. And something interesting that she's had to say about hesitancy, especially you hear a lot of people try to tell you that, oh, black people just don't want to take it. They just don't trust it. Latino people just don't trust it. That's just not true. You'll hear that right here. Here's that conversation. Don't go anywhere. She's really good. You want to listen to Shiva. Here's that conversation. And joining the program today, Shiva Bidar-Sielaff, the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at UW Health. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Good. Now, UW Health had a partnership with Wisconsin Latino Chamber of Commerce on Monday, I think, to get some folks vaccinated. Can you tell us, just generally speaking, why is it important to forge these kind of partnerships to reach those sort of maybe underserved communities?
So I think clearly what we've seen during COVID-19 is that our communities of color were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And then what I have observed, and we have observed during the implementation of vaccination, is that our communities of color have the lowest rates of vaccination, percentages of vaccination. So really those two things would tell you that we really have a lot of work to do to really center kind of racial equity and access to vaccine. It's been extremely difficult for people to figure out, in communities of color specifically, to figure out how to get an appointment for vaccine.
And what are the barriers? Is it like language? Is it just internet access? What is it?
All of the above and more. I think I think that the barriers are that it really is a system that is set up kind of as a first come first serve, which really creates in itself, I think, a lot of barriers, because you have to have the time to put in, your name in multiple lists and try to. And whenever your name comes up, you need to be available to go for that appointment, right? That it could be at whatever time of day. So that's a barrier. The unpredictability, the not knowing how many places and where to put your name. And then, and then, of course, internet access and having the ability to do it online, language access, location access, going to a place that you trust. And, a lot of data and surveys out there say that people of color, they trust their primary care home and clinics to get vaccine. And they also, of course, trust public health. I think those are the places that are really trusted.
And do you also find that they trust local community organizations like the Wisconsin Latino Chamber of Commerce?
Absolutely, 100%. I think that the relationship with community-based organization who have been in the community, who work with the community day in and day out as the people that kind of create the connection with the vaccine is really critical. They're the ones, they're the organizations that know how to reach the people who really need that connection, right? That navigation to how to get a vaccine appointment. And that's what we did yesterday.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about how did that partnership come about, and how did it go? Did you find it successful?
It was extremely successful. So I start with that. We vaccinated almost 200 people, which is the max number of vaccines that we have available for a full day at that 1102 South Park Street location. It was the reason that we did that. It was kind of the first start of this idea of having these vaccine racial equity days. So days that are reserved for this partnership where we can really, through a community-based organization, kind of reserve all the appointments and have kind of that access provided. So that's how the idea came about. We actually have another one today and one on Thursday. Both are full, and we're going to continue doing that. Our thought is at least one day a week, potentially 2 days a week. So the ones that we have today and Thursday, honestly, are a mix of organizations. They're from the Wisconsin Tibetan Association to the Nepali Friendship, Nepali American Friendship Association, my great friend Jackie Hunt and Foster, Latino Academy, Latino Chamber, so this kind of started becoming this whole great program.
And so how can people, if people are in that position where they're having a hard time knowing where to turn, or not having the time or the energy or the resources to put their name on multiple lists, who should they turn to? Where is the place to start?
They're working. I think if they are connected with a community-based organization, I would ask them to get connected with that community. I'm going to be over the next week or so reaching out much more proactively to numerous other organizations, because as I said, this kind of has been building up as a process. So if they can, get connected that way, that would be great. And just, I would say staying abreast of information that we may be sharing with Madison365 as I continue developing this. Really, this was from testing to say, what would happen if we did this? And wow, the need is out there.
So is it fair to say that a person who isn't sure where to go could turn to a community organization that they don't normally think of as a healthcare organization, but just like your local community organization that serves your particular ethnic community? It might have a connection. And is it okay if like one of those organizations would reach out to you to create something like this? Is that they can reach out to you to be helped?
That's exactly right. And I'm going to be reaching out to many organizations and kind of providing them kind of a structure around how they can build their list and send it to me so that we can schedule people every week. So
now, the governor has said we're going to have enough vaccine supply to get to 80% vaccinated by the end of July. Are you optimistic that when we reach that threshold, that those disparities will be much less? Will we see people being vaccinated in proportion to their population? Do you know what I mean? So right now, as you said, they're just
right now we have
under-vaccinated.
Yeah, we have like about 44% of white population in Dane County, and for Black, Latinx, and Asian is somewhere around 20 to 25%. So we have a big gap, and so if we want to get to 80% of everybody, then we need to focus on racial equity, and we need to focus on these issues of access. And I would say that there is a lot of conversation that has happened around hesitancy. What I'm seeing right now is we're nowhere close to hesitancy. We have a lot of demand of people who want vaccine and who have not been able to get access to it in community of color.
I've heard that too. That people they're sort of chalking it up to it's almost victim blaming in a way, like you're not getting it because you don't want to for some reason, and you're wrong about that. But what you're saying is that's not it. It's people want it and can't find it.
Correct.
Right?
That's what I found out in the work that we're doing. I mean, as soon as we started, scheduling these appointments, and as soon as the Latino chambers, for example, started reaching out to their members, it was flooded with people who wanted an appointment, who wanted to get vaccines. So I think that hesitancy conversations are somewhat a bit of a scapegoat sometimes, of like, okay, like that's about hesitancy, so we don't like, that's why the percentages are not that good. But so my hope would be that the communities of Black, Latinx, and Asian community, fortunately Native American community has just outstanding numbers right now, and that's just part of the process of the way that they've been able to get vaccine and implement their vaccination. But I'm hoping that our Black, Latinx, and Asian community will reach 80% before the white population, right? Actually, if you think about it, given that the numbers are similar,
it should be easier to reach, just in terms of pure numbers, if we can get these access programs made, right? Okay. Well, so are these the 2-dose vaccines? Are you having to schedule people to come back a second time? Is that a barrier as well?
So yesterday was Johnson & Johnson.
Okay.
So but today and Thursday are the Pfizer vaccine, and we are scheduling people's second appointment right before they leave their first appointment. So that hasn't actually been the feedback hasn't been that people are really having a hard time with their second appointment. It's more about getting and having assurances of what the schedule is for the second vaccine. So
great. Well, congratulations on getting this going. It sounds like it's successful and will continue to be, we hope. And please do keep us in the loop, and we'll continue to communicate to folks as best we can. And
thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for giving us a few minutes today.
Thank you.
We appreciate Shiva's giving us some time and all of UW Health's efforts to overcome those disparities in those vaccines. Because as we've said many times, having enough supply is one thing. Getting it into those neighborhoods, into those communities, is something else entirely. That is the news for today. I appreciate your sticking with me. I'll be back tomorrow, 4:00. We'll have the It's Only 10 Minutes podcast first thing in the morning. Wherever you listen to podcasts, just search for that. We'll also have a Real Talk with Henry Sanders tomorrow morning. It both has the video on YouTube as well as the podcast. So look for those and get those into your podcast feeds. And I'll be back tomorrow, 4:00. We'll see you then.
This is 365 Media.